Before we continue, tell me where you're watching this video from. And if you like the story, please leave your like and subscribe. Have an excellent day. My name is Margaret. I'm 64 years old. And if you're like me and appreciate a well-planned revenge, then let me tell you this story in detail. I worked for Consolidated Systems, Inc. for 34 years. 34 years of my life dedicated to a company that I helped build from a small regional operation into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. I started there when I was 30, fresh out of a messy divorce, needing stability for myself and my 2 young children. What I found was more than just a job. I found my calling. Consolidated Systems specialized in industrial automation software, the kind of complex programs that keep factories running smoothly. When I started, we had maybe 20 employees and operated out of a converted warehouse on the outskirts of town. The founder, Harold Consolidated, was a brilliant engineer, but a terrible businessman. He could design systems that would revolutionize manufacturing, but he couldn't balance a checkbook to save his life. That's where I came in. I had a degree in computer science and a natural aptitude for understanding both the technical and business sides of our operations. Within my first year, I'd reorganized their entire client database, streamlined their billing system, and identified 3 major inefficiencies that were costing them thousands monthly. Harold noticed. He promoted me to systems manager within 18 months. Over the next decade, I became indispensable. I wasn't just managing systems, I was designing them, implementing them, and most importantly, I was the only person who truly understood how all the pieces fit together. Our software wasn't just code. It was a complex ecosystem of interconnected programs, each one customized for specific client needs. Every factory, every production line, every automated system we serviced had its own unique configuration. Harold used to joke that I was his secret weapon. While other companies struggled with software that broke down, required constant updates, or failed to integrate with existing systems, our clients never had those problems. Why? Because I built redundancies into everything. I created backup systems for the backup systems. I documented every process, every exception, every workaround. But more than that, I kept the most critical information in my head. It wasn't intentional at first. When you work with complex systems for years, you develop an intuitive understanding that goes beyond documentation. You know that Client A's system has a quirk that requires a specific sequence of commands every 3rd Tuesday. You remember that Client B's production line will freeze if you don't account for their modified cooling system. You understand that Client C's integration with their inventory management requires a patch that exists nowhere in the official documentation because you created it on the fly 5 years ago to solve an emergency. Harold understood this. He valued institutional knowledge and treated his long-term employees like family. My salary reflected my importance to the company. I had profit-sharing bonuses, comprehensive benefits, and the respect of everyone from the newest programmer to the senior partners. When Harold retired at 72 and sold the company to a larger corporation, he personally assured me that my position was secure. "Margaret," he said during our farewell dinner, "you're the heart of this operation. Promise me you'll stay until you're ready to retire. These new owners are good people, but they'll need time to understand what we've built here." I promised him I would, and I meant it. I was planning to retire at 65, just 1 year away. I had my pension fully vested, my retirement savings on track, and a small house by the lake already picked out. The new owners, Tech Global Enterprises, seemed professional enough during the transition. They kept all existing staff, maintained our client relationships, and expressed appreciation for the valuable institutional knowledge our team possessed. Their CEO, a sharp-suited 38-year-old named Bradley Morrison, made all the right noises about respecting company culture and maintaining continuity. For the first 6 months, everything seemed fine. Tech Global had deeper pockets than Harold ever did, which meant better equipment, updated software, and the ability to take on larger contracts. I worked closely with their integration team helping them understand our existing systems and client relationships. I created detailed documentation, trained new employees, and gradually began transitioning some of my responsibilities to younger team members. That's when the culture started to shift. Bradley brought in his own people, young hotshots with impressive degrees and aggressive attitudes. They questioned everything, not out of genuine curiosity, but with the dismissive arrogance of people who think experience is less valuable than education. They'd look at our systems and suggest optimizations that would have crashed half our client operations. "Margaret," Bradley said, during one particularly frustrating meeting, "I appreciate your historical perspective, but we need to modernize. These legacy systems you've been maintaining are inefficient by today's standards." He gestured at a PowerPoint slide showing generic efficiency metrics. "We can achieve the same results with half the complexity and a quarter of the maintenance overhead." I tried to explain that our systems weren't complex by accident. They were customized solutions for specific client needs, built over years of trial and error, refined through countless iterations. "Bradley," I said, keeping my voice level, "every modification exists for a reason. When you remove what looks like redundancy, you're actually removing safeguards that prevent catastrophic failures." He smiled condescendingly. "Margaret, I understand you're protective of your work, but trust me, we've done this hundreds of times. Simplification is the key to scalability." He turned to his team of young analysts. "We'll start with the Morrison account. Strip out all the unnecessary protocols and streamline the interface." The Morrison account was our biggest client, an automotive parts manufacturer that relied on our system to coordinate 17 different production lines across 3 facilities. Their setup was indeed complex, but necessarily so. They manufactured everything from tiny electronic components to large engine blocks, each requiring different timing, different quality controls, different integration points with their supply chain. I spent the next week documenting every single protocol, every exception, every critical pathway in their system. I created flowcharts, wrote detailed explanations, and scheduled meetings with Bradley's team to walk them through the intricacies. They attended the meetings, nodded politely, and proceeded to ignore everything I'd told them. 3 weeks later, they implemented their streamlined version. Within 6 hours, Morrison's entire production line was down. 17 assembly lines, 1,200 workers, and a production schedule that supplied parts to major automotive manufacturers across the country. All stopped because Bradley's team had removed what they called redundant verification protocols. I was pulled into an emergency meeting at 2 a.m. Morrison's CEO was on speakerphone, furious, demanding immediate resolution. "This is costing us $50,000 per hour," he shouted. "We have contracts with Ford, GM, and Tesla. If we don't deliver, we don't just lose money, we lose everything." Bradley looked panicked. His team of analysts stared at their laptops, frantically trying to understand what had gone wrong. "Margaret," he said, his condescending tone replaced by desperation, "can you fix this?" Of course I could fix it. I knew exactly what had gone wrong because I'd predicted it. I spent the next 18 hours rebuilding their simplified system, putting back every protocol they'd removed, every safeguard they'd dismissed as unnecessary. Morrison's production line came back online, but the damage was done. They'd lost 2 full days of production, missed critical delivery deadlines, and their trust in our company was severely shaken. The incident should have been a wake-up call for Bradley. Instead, it became a source of resentment. In his mind, I'd somehow sabotaged his team's work to make myself look indispensable. During our post-incident review, he made several pointed comments about legacy thinking and resistance to change. "Margaret," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "I appreciate that you are able to resolve the situation, but we need to discuss your attitude toward modernization efforts. Your reluctance to embrace new methodologies is becoming a barrier to progress." I stared at him across the conference table, this man who was barely out of college when I was already managing complex industrial systems. "Bradley," I said quietly, "my only concern is maintaining the reliability our clients depend on. If there's resistance to change, then I'm guilty as charged. Over the following months, Bradley systematically began undermining my authority. He restructured the department, bringing in younger managers who reported to him directly rather than through me. He excluded me from strategic planning meetings, claiming they were focused on future initiatives rather than current operations. He questioned my recommendations in front of clients, suggesting that my approaches were outdated and inefficient. The writing was on the wall, but I was so close to retirement that I convinced myself I could endure it. Just 8 more months. I could handle 8 more months of condescension, marginalization, and professional disrespect. My pension was fully vested, my benefits were secure, and I had already started planning my retirement party. That's when Bradley made his move. It was a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 1 month before my planned retirement date. I was called into his office along with Jennifer from Human Resources, a nervous young woman who couldn't make eye contact. "Margaret," Bradley began, his voice professionally neutral, "we've been conducting a comprehensive review of our operations, and we've identified some significant inefficiencies in your department." He slid a folder across his desk. "We've decided to restructure your role. Effective immediately, we're eliminating your position and redistributing your responsibilities among the existing team." I felt the world tilt slightly. Eliminating my position? "Bradley, I'm retiring in 4 weeks. My replacement has already been hired. The transition plan is in place." He shrugged, feigning sympathy. "I understand this is unexpected, but business needs have changed. We've determined that your role is redundant with our new organizational structure." He gestured to Jennifer. "HR will handle the details of your severance package." Jennifer cleared her throat nervously. "Margaret, because this is a position elimination rather than a termination for cause, you'll receive 2 weeks severance pay and continuation of your benefits through the end of the month." She paused, clearly uncomfortable. "However, since you haven't technically reached retirement age, your pension benefits will need to be recalculated based on early departure." The implications hit me like a physical blow. By firing me 1 month before my planned retirement, they were reducing my pension by nearly 30%. 34 years of service, and they were stealing my retirement because I had become inconvenient. "This is illegal," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "You're retaliating against me for doing my job. You're stealing my pension because you can't handle being shown up by someone with actual experience." Bradley's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the petty satisfaction underneath. "Margaret, you're being dramatic. This is simply a business decision based on operational efficiency. If you feel we've acted improperly, you're welcome to consult with an attorney." I stood up slowly, looking at this man who had just destroyed my financial security out of pure spite. "I'll be sure to do that, Bradley. In the meantime, I hope you're confident in your team's ability to maintain the systems I've been managing for 3 decades. His smile was cold. "I'm sure they'll manage just fine without your historical perspective." I cleaned out my office that afternoon. 34 years of my professional life packed into 3 cardboard boxes. My colleagues were shocked, whispering among themselves about the injustice of it all. Several offered to help me fight the decision, but what could they do? Bradley controlled their jobs just as he'd controlled mine. As I walked out of Consolidated Systems for the last time, carrying my boxes to the parking lot, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not just anger, but a cold, calculating fury that reminded me why I'd been so successful in my career. I was a problem solver. I was a systems thinker. And Bradley Morrison had just become my most interesting problem. I spent the first week of my forced retirement consulting with an employment attorney. The news wasn't good. Bradley had been careful to document a paper trail of performance concerns and resistance to change. He'd restructured the department in a way that technically eliminated my position, rather than firing me personally. The pension reduction was legal, if morally reprehensible. "Margaret," my attorney said, "you have a case, but it's not a strong one. Corporate restructuring is legal, even when the timing is suspicious. You could fight it, but it would take years and cost more than you'd likely recover." I thanked him for his honesty and paid his consultation fee. As I drove home, I started thinking about Bradley's confident assertion that his team would manage just fine without my historical perspective. It was time to test that theory. I knew exactly how long it would take for problems to emerge. Our systems were stable, but they required constant maintenance, regular updates, and immediate response to anomalies. More importantly, they required someone who understood the intricate relationships between different components, someone who could troubleshoot complex failures quickly and efficiently. The first call came on a Thursday, 6 days after my departure. It was from Jenny, one of the junior programmers who'd always been respectful of my experience. "Margaret," she whispered into the phone, "I know I'm not supposed to contact you, but we have a problem with the Henderson account. Their system is throwing error codes that aren't in any of our documentation. Bradley's team has been working on it for 2 days, and it's getting worse." The Henderson account was a mid-sized food processing plant that relied on our system to coordinate their packaging lines with their inventory management. It was a relatively simple setup, but it had one quirk that I discovered years ago. Their conveyor system had a slight timing lag that required a specific buffer protocol. Without it, the packaging would get out of sync with the labeling, creating a cascade failure that could shut down their entire operation. "Jenny," I said carefully, "I'm no longer an employee of Consolidated Systems. I can't provide technical support for client accounts." "I understand," she said, "but people are panicking. Bradley is screaming at everyone. The client is threatening to sue and nobody knows what to do." I felt a familiar satisfaction, the same feeling I used to get when solving particularly complex problems. "I'm sorry to hear that. I hope they figure it out soon." The second call came on Monday. This time it was from Marcus, one of the senior developers who'd been with the company for 8 years. "Margaret, I need to ask you something, and I know it's not fair, but the Williamson account is completely down. Their entire production line has been frozen for 3 days. We've tried everything in the manual, but nothing works. Bradley is talking about flying in consultants from corporate, but that could take weeks. The Williamson account was our most complex client, a pharmaceutical manufacturer with strict FDA compliance requirements. The system wasn't just about efficiency, it was about safety, traceability, and regulatory compliance. Every batch of medication had to be tracked from raw materials through final packaging, with complete documentation at every step. "Marcus," I said, "I'm sure Bradley's team can handle it. They did eliminate my position because it was redundant after all." There was a long pause. "Margaret, they're talking about declaring bankruptcy. Williamson is threatening to sue for breach of contract. If they go down, they'll take half our client base with them." I felt a twinge of sympathy for Marcus and the other long-term employees who were caught in the middle of Bradley's arrogance. But I also felt something else, the sweet satisfaction of being proven right. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, "but I'm retired now. I'm sure they'll work something out." By Wednesday, the calls were coming daily. Different employees, different crises, but the same underlying problem. Bradley's team had no idea how to maintain the systems I'd built over 34 years. They could read the documentation, but they couldn't understand the context. They could follow the procedures, but they couldn't troubleshoot the exceptions. Friday afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it wasn't an employee. It was Bradley himself. "Margaret," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "I hope you're enjoying your retirement. I'm calling because we have a few technical questions about some of our legacy systems. I was wondering if you might be available for a brief consultation." I let the silence stretch between us. "Bradley, I'm surprised to hear from you. I thought your team would manage just fine without my historical perspective." "Well," he said, and I could hear the strain in his voice, "there have been a few unexpected complications. Nothing major, just some minor technical issues that could benefit from your expertise." "I see," I said. "And what kind of compensation are you offering for this consultation?" The pause was long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. "We were thinking of a standard consulting rate, maybe $50 per hour." I laughed. Actually laughed out loud. "Bradley, my standard rate is $200 per hour, with a minimum of 40 hours per week, and I require a 6-month contract with full benefits." That's more than you are making as an employee. Yes, I said. It is. But I'm not an employee anymore, am I? I'm a consultant. And consultants who possess unique, irreplaceable knowledge can command premium rates. Margaret, be reasonable. We're just talking about a few hours of troubleshooting. Actually, Bradley, we're talking about saving your company from bankruptcy. How many clients have you lost this week? How many are threatening to leave? How much is each day of downtime costing you? Another long pause. I'll need to discuss this with corporate and get back to you. Of course, I said. Take your time. I'm retired after all. I have nothing but time. He hung up without saying goodbye. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my back porch, watching the sunset over the lake. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely relaxed. Monday morning brought a call from Tech Global's corporate headquarters. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and unfamiliar. Miss Margaret, this is David Chen, Regional Director for Tech Global Enterprises. I understand you've been consulting with our subsidiary, Consolidated Systems, regarding some technical issues. Actually, I said, your subsidiary contacted me about potential consulting work, but we haven't reached an agreement yet. I see. Well, I'm calling to discuss terms. We're prepared to offer you a consulting contract at $150 per hour, 30 hours per week, for a period of 3 months. I smiled. Mr. Chen, I appreciate the offer, but my rates are $200 per hour, 40 hours minimum, 6 months guaranteed, non-negotiable. Miss Margaret, that's quite expensive for consulting work. Mr. Chen, let me ask you a question. How much revenue has Consolidated Systems lost in the past 2 weeks? There was a pause. I'm not at liberty to discuss specific financial details. I understand, but I imagine it's significantly more than my consulting fees would cost. How many clients are threatening to leave? How much are you spending on emergency contractors who can't solve the problems? How much will it cost to rebuild 34 years of institutional knowledge from scratch? Another pause. Longer this time. Your terms are acceptable. When can you start? I can start immediately, I said. But I have one additional requirement. I'll need a formal apology from Bradley Morrison, acknowledging that eliminating my position was a mistake. I'll need to discuss that with him. Take your time, Mr. Chen. Every day you wait is another day of lost revenue. The call came back within 2 hours. Bradley would provide the written apology. I would start the following Monday. My consulting rate was nearly 3 times what I'd been making as an employee, and I would be working on my own terms. Monday morning, I walked back into the Consolidated Systems building wearing my best suit and carrying a briefcase. The security guard, recognizing me, looked confused. Miss Margaret? I thought you'd retired. I did, I said. Now I'm back as a consultant. The look on Bradley's face when I walked into the office was worth every moment of the past 2 weeks. He stood up from his desk, his usual confidence replaced by obvious discomfort. Margaret, he said, extending his hand. Thank you for coming back to help us through this transition period. I didn't take his hand. Instead, I sat down across from his desk and opened my briefcase. Before we begin, I believe you have something for me. He slid an envelope across the desk. Inside was a formal letter on company letterhead, signed by both Bradley and David Chen, acknowledging that eliminating my position had been premature and that they regretted the decision. It wasn't exactly the groveling apology I'd fantasized about, but it was an official admission that they'd been wrong. Now then, I said, putting the letter away, let's discuss the scope of work. I understand you have several critical system failures that need attention. Over the next 6 months, I systematically repaired every problem that Bradley's team had created. I restored the protocols they'd eliminated, rebuilt the safeguards they'd removed, and re-established the relationships they'd damaged. I worked at my own pace, on my own schedule, answering only to David Chen and the other corporate executives who'd hired me. Bradley was still technically my supervisor, but the power dynamic had completely reversed. He needed me far more than I needed him. Every suggestion he made was a request, not an order. Every criticism he offered was immediately contradicted by results. His team of young analysts watched me work with a mixture of admiration and resentment, finally understanding the complexity of what they tried to replace. The best part was watching him struggle to maintain his authority while being completely dependent on my expertise. During client meetings, he'd try to take credit for solutions I'd implemented, but the clients knew better. They'd seen the difference between his team's failures and my successes. "Margaret," said Patricia Williamson, CEO of our pharmaceutical client, during one particularly memorable meeting, "I want to thank you personally for getting our systems back online. Your expertise saved our company." She turned to Bradley with barely concealed disdain. "I hope you realize how valuable she is." Bradley smiled tightly. "Of course. Margaret's historical perspective has been invaluable during this transition." After the meeting, I cornered him in the hallway. "Bradley, I want you to understand something. You thought you could discard me like outdated equipment, steal my pension, and replace me with cheaper alternatives. But what you actually did was turn me from a loyal employee into your most expensive contractor." He looked uncomfortable. "Margaret, I hope you don't think this was personal. It was just a business decision." "Oh, it was absolutely personal," I said. "And so is this. You're paying me $200 an hour to fix problems that wouldn't exist if you hadn't been so arrogant. You're paying me more in 6 months than you saved by eliminating my position. And when my contract ends, you'll still be dependent on systems that only I fully understand." His face reddened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you've learned an expensive lesson about the difference between experience and education. You've learned that institutional knowledge isn't something you can just eliminate and replace. And most importantly, you've learned that when you screw over someone with my expertise, you'd better make sure you never need their help again." As my contract neared its end, I received another call from David Chen. "Margaret, your work has been exceptional. We'd like to discuss extending your contract, possibly making it permanent." "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but I think 6 months has been enough. I've stabilized the systems, trained your team, and documented everything they need to know. It's time for me to actually retire." "I understand. But what if we have problems after you leave?" I smiled. "Then you'll need to hire me back at consultant rates. But I'm confident your team can handle routine maintenance now. They've learned a lot over the past 6 months. On my last day, I cleaned out my temporary office and said goodbye to the colleagues I'd worked with for over 3 decades. Bradley was notably absent, but that was fine. I'd said everything I needed to say to him. As I walked to my car, carrying my final box of personal items, I reflected on the journey from termination to vindication. Bradley had tried to humiliate me, steal my pension, and discard me like obsolete equipment. Instead, he'd given me the opportunity to prove my worth in the most dramatic way possible. I'd earned more in 6 months as a consultant than I would have in 2 years as an employee. More importantly, I'd restored my professional reputation and demonstrated to everyone in the industry that experience and institutional knowledge couldn't be replaced by young analysts with impressive degrees. 6 months later, I was sitting by the lake, reading a book and enjoying my actual retirement when my phone rang. It was Jenny, the junior programmer who'd first called me during the crisis. "Margaret," she said, "I hope you don't mind me calling. I know you're retired, but we have a situation." "What kind of situation?" "Bradley's gone. Corporate transferred him to a different division after our client satisfaction scores crashed. The new manager is nice, but she doesn't understand our systems. We've got 3 major accounts threatening to leave, and nobody knows how to fix the problems." I sipped my coffee and watched a heron fishing in the shallows. "I'm sorry to hear that, Jenny. Have you tried consulting the documentation I left?" "We have, but it's not the same as having someone who really understands the systems. Would you consider coming back, even just for a few weeks?" I smiled. "Jenny, I'm truly retired now, but I might be willing to consider a consulting arrangement. My rates are $300 per hour, 50 hours minimum, and I'll need a corporate car and full benefits." There was a pause. "I'll have to check with the new manager, but I think we can make that work." "Take your time," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." As I hung up the phone, I reflected on the beautiful irony of the situation. Bradley Morrison had tried to eliminate me to save money and assert his authority. Instead, he'd transformed me from a loyal employee earning a modest salary into a high-priced consultant who could command premium rates whenever they needed my expertise. The company that had once valued my 34 years of service at a standard employee salary now had to pay consultant rates every time they encountered a problem beyond their team's capabilities. Bradley, meanwhile, had been quietly transferred to a different division, his reputation damaged by the crisis he'd created and the expensive solution he'd been forced to accept. I never did take that final consulting contract. I was financially secure, professionally vindicated, and genuinely ready to enjoy my retirement. But I kept the offer open, a reminder to anyone who might be tempted to discard experienced employees that institutional knowledge has value, respect has a price, and revenge is a dish best served with a $300 hourly rate. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic or immediate. Sometimes it's simply allowing people to discover the true cost of their arrogance. Bradley Morrison learned that lesson the hard way, and it cost his company far more than my pension ever would have. That knowledge, more than any financial compensation, was the sweetest part of my victory. Today, I'm genuinely retired, living comfortably by the lake, with a pension that was eventually restored through a quiet settlement with Tech Global's corporate headquarters. My story has become something of a legend in our industry, a cautionary tale about the dangers of discarding experienced employees and the value of treating people with respect. And every time I hear about a company trying to replace institutional knowledge with cheaper alternatives, I smile and remember the look on Bradley's face when he had to ask for my help at $200 an hour. Some lessons are expensive, but they're worth every penny.